Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. This episode is an exploration of one of the principles of solo, to create more than you consume. I recognize that is not an easy request, but no one said that living a remarkable life will be easy. Even if you don't like writing, I ask that you give this episode a listen. It may inspire you to write more, even if it's just to start a gratitude journal. I speak to a friend and writer, Mary Dom, about the difference between informal and formal writing. We discuss some lessons about writing and building a creative practice from my new book, Stick to Business. One of the more interesting ideas is that we talk about how writing is not as solo an activity as you might think. Just as you need others to live remarkably, you need others to write for others. One last thing, as an experiment, I added a new segment called Things Peter Thinks. Let me know if you like it. And if you stick around to the end for the bonus material, Mary presents some fascinating case studies about the lengths that writers will go to in order to excel at their craft. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Mary Dom.
Hello.
Mary is a writer and high school English teacher. She studied English literature and history at Boston College and recently earned a master's in teaching from USC. She also likes to deadlift. Welcome, Mary.
Pete doesn't hang out with anyone who doesn't like to deadlift.
You like deadlifting more than I like deadlifting.
That's true.
I think the average person could stand to deadlift, or at least lift weights more often.
Yes, I would agree.
So first of all, we are taping this about 5 days into the shutdown due to the corona pandemic. And we're going to cover some topics related to the shutdown and some that are not. In any case, we don't know what the world will look like when this comes out. Mary thinks it's going to be worse. I think it's going to be better, but that's my caveat.
Hey, I didn't say it would be worse. I said that you're underestimating how long it's going to be. I didn't say that we'd be at a net negative when it was over.
It's true. We were having a conversation prior to this. So let me map out this conversation today, at least how I think it'll go. We'll have some flexibility. So first, Mary doesn't know I'm going to do this. First, I'm going to try something new, something that I call Things Peter is Thinking About. And then I'm going to welcome reactions from my guest. So she has no idea what I'm going to talk about. Then we're going to talk about one of the principles that I've been developing that are designed to accompany the podcast and just sort of thinking about solo in general. And this episode is an experiment in delving more deeply into that principle. And that principle is create more than you consume. And we're going to use writing as a case study. By the way, this create more than you can consume, create more than you consume is a popular one. I've had a number of people reach out to me telling me how much it's making them think differently. So I'm pretty excited about that. Then we're going to talk about the various ways that writing can serve you personally and professionally. And this is whether or not you're a novice or an expert. Are you a novice or an expert?
Somewhere in between.
Okay, of course. And now if you stick around to the end for the bonus material, Mary's going to share 3 of her favorite stories about the magnificent lengths that writers will go about honing their craft. So I think I'm actually, as often is the case, I'm most excited for the bonus material. Okay, so let's jump into things Peter is thinking about. Or should it be things Peter is thinking?
You can't end a sentence with about because it's a preposition. So you can.
You sound like a high school English teacher right now.
Yeah, I can't imagine why I would sound like that.
So, not surprisingly, they're all related to the pandemic. All right. So The first one is, it's a question that I ask my MBA students at the end of the semester. I usually give them a set of questions to ponder during the break. And it's also a question that comes up in my new book. And that is your health number one? Or what I like to say, is your health really number one? And I think that has, for me, has been, that question I think is being highlighted for a lot of people for two reasons. One is because people are, self-quarantining? Or being quarantined?
Sort of both.
Right.
Yeah.
That their normal exercise and workout regimes are being disrupted. And I think that's affecting people in a negative way in a variety of ways. So people are going to have to work a little harder or be a little bit more creative. Also, everybody's like sort of stocking up on all these foods that are come in boxes and packages, like highly processed food. And so I think for a number of people, the quality of their food is going to go down. Right.
Although, I don't think that's necessary. I've gone to, and we're in a populous city. We're in Los Angeles. I've gone to different grocery stores. There's plenty of food.
Yes, there's not a food shortage.
Right. There's not a food. I guess it's a matter of how often are you willing to leave your home.
Yes.
So if you want to leave it as infrequently as possible, then I can see you're going for those. But my roommate and I are probably going to go to the grocery store like once a week. To me, the food situation is not different than it was before. But I get that everybody's handling this differently.
Yeah. What I think is like that perceptions can become reality. So if people stocked up on foods because they're worried about a shortage, real or imagined, now they have all this packaged goods. They're going to eat it because they don't want to waste it.
The funny thing is that Sharon and I live in Koreatown, and we went to H Mart. It's a Korean grocery store chain for people who don't know H Mart. And we love buying the sashimi from the fish market there.
Okay.
And it was stocked. It was like beautiful ruby red tuna and salmon. And it was like, we just bought all this like fresh fish. And we had like a feast in the middle of the pandemic. So
that's exciting.
There's food.
Well, I think also what's happening is no one's taking pictures of full shelves at supermarkets because that doesn't get attention. So it's sort of fueling some of this. And then the last part of this is the sleep, is that people, because they're anxious, probably, I think a lot of people are not sleeping very well.
Right.
And so the great irony, of course, in all of this is it's more difficult to exercise, or your exercise, normal regimes are being disrupted. You might not be eating as much fresh fruits and vegetables, something that we've covered in a previous episode of Solo called Eating for a Remarkable Life. And people's sleep is disrupted. And then the great irony of all of that is if you don't want to be infected, and if you do get infected, you want to be as healthy as possible. There's this sort of unintended consequence of shutting yourself in for people's health. Now, of course, what I've been thinking a lot about is what are the long-term consequences of this? Because as I've already said before, is I'm being rather optimistic about how this is going to turn out, perhaps overly so in terms of how quickly we can go back to normal everyday life. But nonetheless, I think like for the most part, we're actually going to be better off for it. We're going to be better off for the next crisis. I think we're going to start finally respecting scientists again rather than dismissing their views, because they're going to be probably the real saviors in the long run of this. And I think it's going to also just change people's habits. It's going to get them to think differently about how they live their lives. For example, asking the question, is my health really number one? And then perhaps also making change in their life. Like you're just kind of, you might have been sort of sleepwalking through life, and then this is a bit of a wake-up call, which is, if this ended tomorrow, would I be really fulfilled?
And I think also, on a broader social scale, we're obviously a very disunified country. And I've been doing on my Instagram this book a day thing. As a book nerd, I recommend a book a day, and I hope that people are reading more during this. I don't know if they are. But I recommended today this book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger.
Oh, yes, I've heard of it.
It's about that he spent a year on this remote, very dangerous outpost in Afghanistan, and he studied not why do veterans struggle with PTSD, but why do veterans miss war? And even Londoners, after the Blitz of World War II was over, they actually missed that crisis when they were in danger constantly because neighbors were helping neighbors and people sort of united together for this collective good. And to me, that's happening now in a way that sometimes it takes a common tragedy to bring people together, or I don't know if this is a tragedy, like a common difficulty, a hardship to bring people together. A threat.
A big threat.
A threat that affects everyone. And so to me, it's sort of before this, the threat was each other. The liberals in LA, the threat is Trump voters, right? I mean,
and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. So now we're all facing the same threat. And in some ways, I think this could be good for the country.
Mm-hmm. And also globally, right?
Yeah,
so there's that other issue. As I like to say is situations like this bring out the best in the best people and the worst in the worst people.
Right.
And so what we're going to see, and what I want to try to do, and I've already tried to do this once with the first sort of pandemic related podcast, is how can we find the positive? I mean, Mary, you know me very well, and so
I think Pete is too positive. I'm just putting it out there. But I'm too negative.
Yeah, so it's like I'm like Tigger and she's like Eeyore.
That's our joke.
So that was the first one, and I mean I've been really working on this for myself personally, and so this is sort of top of mind about health. The second one is related to a recent episode that I taped called Lisa's Second Mountain. And so that hasn't been released at the time of this taping, but it'll be out by the time this comes out. And in it, I talked to an old friend, who I've kind of been reunited with, and she is starting a second chapter in her life. And,
Pete loves second chapters.
I really like people who bet on themselves. I like people who make big change. And so I like this idea of your second mountain. You've climbed a mountain and you could stay up there and just ride it out, or you could go back down to the base and then perhaps find a bigger mountain. And so that's what Lisa's doing. And I heard this quote, in the meantime, Confucius quote that says, "We have two lives, and the second one begins when we realize we only have one." So we have two lives, and the second one begins when we realize we only have one. And in some cases, it's you get to the mountain and you go, okay, wow, I did it, but I think what's happening right now is it's these kind of moments that can create profound change, and recognizing the impermanence of life, might prompt that second life that Confucius is referring
I think
to.
More broadly, anything that disrupts life, it forces reflection, and then it forces reflection and just forces you to change your habits and then maybe just think about everything. You can cut that. I don't know.
And now we're keeping it in because I agree with you. I think, first of all, this is that idea of reflections related to the topic today of writing, because writing can be a great way to reflect on life. And we'll return to that momentarily. So the last thing that I'm thinking is related to jobs. And so there's an essay turned book by David Graeber. David's an anthropologist. I'll put the essay in the exhibits. Really, you only need to read the essay. You don't need to read the book. But in it, he puts forth this sort of idea, this notion of what he calls bullshit jobs. And so, as defined by him, a bullshit job is a form of paid employment that is so completely pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious that even the employee cannot justify its existence, even though as part of the conditions of employment, the employee feels obliged to pretend that this is not the case.
Yeah. Was that a New Yorker article?
No, it was actually I think maybe the book review or something showed up in the New Yorker,
Yeah,
but the original.
I read that, but I have not read the book.
Yes, the book's like surprisingly dense, but the basics of the ideas is really nicely laid out in that essay. But what I think is really fascinating about this is twofold. One is I think some people are wondering how much their job is bullshit, right? As they're being forced to not work in the office, you know, and then they just kind of go, well, how much am I really doing? You know, well, how much of what I do is really matters, right? Like,
am I Jim in the office?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Jim Halpert from The Office, right? Who's just wondering, just kind of coasting through life. And the only time he gets really excited is when he's like playing pranks on.
Yeah. And he has plenty of time to play.
On Dwight. Yes. So the idea, what I think is very interesting about this is that the status of a job and its bullshittiness can be independent. And that sometimes the least bullshit jobs are often the least status-based jobs. So one way to think about, do you have a bullshit job or not, is if you stop doing it, does the world change in any fundamental way? And as we're being reminded, like, who are the people who make the world work? You know, especially make the world work when it comes to a pandemic, are people like custodians and people who deliver food. You know, these kind of jobs that we might think of as low status, and yet they are far from bullshit. You know, I think Graeber uses the example of the rodeo clown, right? So you think of a rodeo clown as like this frivolous kind of thing, but yet without a rodeo clown, there's a bunch of bull riders getting stomped while they lay on the ground. And so I'm not accusing anyone of having a bullshit job. Only you can determine whether your job is bullshit or not. But, you know, a lot of sort of middle management jobs sort of feel that way. And as I've said in previous episodes, I just don't think a lot of people who have been commuting to their office park and now they've had a break from it, when it comes time to go back, how excited will they be? This is related to your point about reflecting. And so that's just something that came to me as, you know, I'm in this co-working space right now. We're the only ones here.
We shouldn't be here, honestly.
We're the only ones here.
The lights just turned off.
Yeah, they're uncensored. But you know who's going to come in an hour or so? Our cleaning staff.
Yep.
And and boy, don't we appreciate them more. Other folks like a line chef at a diner, like a housekeeper, you can go on and on. There's a lot of these sort of quote unquote low status jobs that the people might look down on, but boy, I think this kind of thing can make us appreciate them.
I agree.
All right. Well, thank you for indulging me on that. I don't know if we'll keep doing that kind of thing. I've been experimenting with this idea. So Mary, you are a listener of Solo. You've listened to many, but not all of the episodes.
Yes. Many, but not all.
Yes. And I'm curious and you will be honest with me.
I'm usually honest with you.
You are. Yeah, too, sometimes. Your reaction so far to the start of the podcast. What do you like? What do you not like?
Sure. So my favorite episode is the one that you said is the most popular episode, the Bella DePaulo. It's the second episode of The Science of Single Living.
Yes. I've gotten some feedback that should be the first episode.
Yes, that was also my feedback. And Neil Brennan's feedback. I mean, if we're not listening to Neil Brennan, who are we listening to?
He is a smart guy.
So, I mean, I like that episode because that's my inherent bias. I'm a nerd. I very much enjoy academia. So I'm going to be biased toward an episode where you're interviewing a professor. But I find it interesting that somebody studied this from the perspective of a social scientist and truly examining the ways that not just, it's underrated to be single, but that single people are actually sort of discriminated against in society and in the legal system. So I found that one fascinating.
You know, the other thing that's really interesting about that is how early she was.
So early.
I feel early with this, but she was 15, 18 years early in terms of identifying this as an idea.
And what I love, honestly, as a woman, I would love to be solo my whole life. It's a little bit of a different situation because I would like to have more time to write. And that might be easier if I got married.
Married without children.
Without children. I don't want to have children. That would be the greatest tragedy I would rather get coronavirus than have a baby. I really would. But I don't know. it's the problem. I don't know if it's a problem, but it's just the fact of this and just the way that the values of our society. If you look at a 50-year-old single woman and a 50-year-old single man, it's very clear that one of those is easier to be, preferable. So seeing Bella DePaulo as an older woman, happily single, that means the world to me. Mm-hmm. It was really inspiring to see that. So,
which one do you like the least?
The least. Well, I have not listened to all of them. Probably the first one.
It's a little messy. I get that.
That's not good. It's not good that my least favorite is the first one. But that's just me. It's not everyone.
That's fair. Okay. I may relaunch at some point and switch it all up. Okay, so let's get into this for a moment. We're going to get to your story about your writing, how you got into it, and your approach to it all. But one of the things that I want to highlight is this principle, this idea of create more than you consume. And so you've heard me talk about it before, both on the air and privately. And it's sort of a simple idea. It's that the average person's ratio of creation to consumption is like 1 to 30.
Right.
So for every 1 hour they spend making something, they spend 30 hours consuming something. And I want to be clear, I'm not against consuming. I just want to flip the ratio. And I mean, the ideal for me would be 3 to 1. For every 3 hours you spend creating, you spend an hour consuming. I think that's like a nice ratio. Mm-hmm. But if someone could get to 1 to 1, I think it would have a profound change on their life.
I agree.
And and I think that the profound change is twofold. So the first one is that when you create something, you have something to show for it, right? You've actually made something, even if it's just like a meal or an event that you've thrown, or a new business or a poem, or a blog post or a podcast, and that value then can be transferred to other people, that other people can enjoy this thing. And so now you're doing something that is, bigger than yourself, so to speak. And as I like this idea of like solo, but not alone. I like this idea of solo and connected. And so when you make something, you are then connecting to others. And I think that's important to do. To
me, it's beyond that. It's also, so I think beyond just the finished product, an important part to me about creating things is the idea of mastery. On Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like mastery is actually a fundamental, it's more toward the top of being fulfilled as a human being and having your needs met. But that's what gets people addicted to video games, mastering a level and getting to the next one. So creating something is that too.
But a good substitute.
A good substitute for video games. I'm
fine if someone wants to make video games.
Yeah, I find video games creepy, but we won't get into that.
No, it's fine.
As a teacher, I see a lot of students that are like only playing video games.
Well, but again, the point is this. I actually do want to get into it for a moment because I have male listeners who play too many video games. Right. And the issue is it's not you shouldn't play video games. It's just the ratio of creating things.
But video games are designed to be addictive, and they're designed to manipulate the human desire to feel mastery.
That's fair.
So it's difficult, especially if for adults, it's different. For teenagers with developing brains, it's very difficult for them to play video games casually.
Yeah, that's fair. So you're saying that are you saying basically video games are kind of an all or none proposition? Like you'd be better off just going cold. So I stopped playing.
Not necessarily, not for everyone, but it's just, you're 17, 18 years old, you're vulnerable, or younger, you're vulnerable to going way too far.
I mean, here's the other thing is if you're 35, single, and play a lot of video games, stop. Because it's not helping your dating life. That's fair. I stopped playing video games when I went to college. I just realized they were going to crowd out other more important activities, and it's one of the best decisions I've ever
it's
made.
not even that they're bad in and of themselves. It's just this is what we're talking about, right? Like that's why it's a ratio.
Yes, it's a ratio.
Consuming to creating. If you spend too much time on one thing, you have less time for everything else. So that's just how life works. So I think it's important to be very intentional with your time.
Yes.
And say, what am I spending every hour of my day on?
Yeah. So there's opportunity cost.
That's a foreshadowing to the, what's it called? Bonus materials. Is one of the things.
So I'm glad you brought that up about mastery. And so, so on day one of my MBA class, I show Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then I talk about what a shit theory it is.
So I just brought up a theory that you shit on every time you...
Every time I teach a new class. Yes. No, I don't...
Well, USC is teaching it, so...
Well, the problem is that it's the sort of default... it's sort of the default model because people teach it because it's been taught before. It's very familiar. And at first glance, it actually seems to make sense. I don't want to go into all the details about why I don't like it. But one of the things that I don't like about it is that it has this set path. Like, this is how you live a good life. You accomplish this, then you accomplish this, then you accomplish this, and you accomplish this.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think that there's a lot of evidence that people live good lives without following that path.
Yeah.
And it also ignores things like, for example, cultural effects. It also ignores development, which is some of those things in the hierarchy of needs become more or less important at different stages in life. And so my preference, which I talked about in the What is a Remarkable Life episode.
Can I just say about the Maslows that I was not paying attention for much of my grad program, and I don't remember what else was on it. I was just saying I like the idea of mastery.
I'm not going to... Hold on. You're being overly defensive because I'm not going to... Just because I think you were wrong about Maslow doesn't mean I think you were wrong about mastery.
Right, but what I'm saying is I'm not advocating Maslow. I was just bringing up, mastery. It's on the triangle.
Yes. Okay. But the notion of mastery, I think, is a path to living a remarkable life. So I would call it engagement. Right. And so I'm a big fan of the PERMA model by Martin Seligman that talks about these different ways that you can live a good life, one of which is engagement, which is creative pursuits. And so there's fundamentally something different from consuming something that was the outcome of a creative endeavor, reading a book, listening to a podcast, watching. By the way, keep listening to this podcast, but also if you want, launch your own. So what happens is that when you are engaged in creating something and you're solving problems, you have this ability to enter what's called a flow state, and that sort of time melts away and you have this sort of pleasant feeling. It's not pleasant like a nap or pleasant like sex, but it's a positive feeling. And it's why my podcasts go long sometimes, because you just get into it and it just time melts away.
Well, I'm going to be offended if this is short.
Right now it's looking that way. So I think that's... So what I think is the problem, of course, is that mastery doesn't happen easy. Not easily. Mm-hmm. Like it's easy to watch a movie. It's hard to learn to direct a movie.
Right.
It's easy to read a book. It's hard to learn to write a book. And so what happens is people often give up too early. They don't realize that it takes months, years of working on something to get so good at it that not only can you make something great, but then you can also enjoy the process of making that thing. So in general, the takeaway, whether it's 1-30 or 3-1, what I invite people to do is to just get really honest with themselves about how much listening, watching, consuming that you're doing, and then look for opportunities to create things instead. And I'm not telling people that they need to write or they need to sculpt or whatever it is. I mean, obviously artistic endeavors are the sort of ideal state, but, think of making things. Throwing a party is a creation process. Scrapbooking is a creation process. And, those kinds of things. And so the way to do it, I believe, is to just look at what are you sort of naturally drawn to, And then can you just spend a little bit more time on that kind of thing? So we're going to talk though about writing more specifically. And so Mary, you're a writer. I love your writing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I've seen it got better and better. And so can just tell me a little bit about when you knew that you wanted to be a writer. I mean, you're committed to being a writer in a way that few writers are.
Yeah.
I mean, you're so committed you're thinking of marrying someone that you don't even love in order to support your habit.
I mean, I want to be a writer more than I want a family. I also don't want a family. So I would say I want to be a writer more than
anything else in the world.
Basically everything.
If you had to choose between deadlifting and writing, which would you choose?
I would replace deadlifts with squats. I'd choose writing. No, I mean, I would say that really I can't remember a time when I didn't want to be a writer, I guess is the best answer. I wanted to be a writer when I was 5.
Okay.
Like, it just goes that far back. And then it's been stops and starts. There's been a lot of times where I quit for a long time just because I didn't have much support, and I quit for a long time after I graduated college. And college is this academic. I mean, I loved my college experience. It's this like academic environment. I had all these friends who were also English majors. I could just go to my friends and we'd talk about British modernist poetry, and then you go out into the real world and that's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that's really striking about you is you're a little bit of a throwback.
Yeah,
like
I'm like an old.
Late.
I think of myself as like an old man in a 27-year-old woman's body. We were talking about this earlier.
That's funny because I feel like a young man in a 50-year-old man's body.
Yeah.
I think like I was born too early and you were born too late.
I don't want to be born earlier though, because I like being a woman, and I don't want to be a woman anytime before now.
But I mean, in terms of like, you read the classics.
Yes.
You would.
Yeah.
There was a time where the type of writing that you appreciate was the pinnacle.
Yeah, I would say I live in the best time for my gender. You can complain about being a woman, but it's definitely better to be a woman now than it has been at any other time. And I live in. People can dispute this maybe, but I would say the worst time to be a writer in all of history.
Well, it's not the worst time to be a writer.
I mean,
there was
a literary writer, TV writer, and I've had friends tell me you should write for TV, and I don't want to, and I never will. Not that it's like an option, not that people are like banging my door down to get me to write for TV, but no, I mean, I'm obsessed with getting into these different literary journals and magazines, and I'm constantly reading things that I read lit journals and magazines every night before I go to bed, and I'm just astounded by how fantastic this. It's nonfiction, it's fiction, it's poetry. There's so much out there, and I think about the fact that I just have so many friends that if I were to turn off the TV for a night, give them this thing to read, which a lot of it is free because you can just go to the websites of these magazines, and if you can subscribe and stuff, you can read things without subscribing. Give them something. We both read it and we talk about it. I'm sure at the end of that, I would say, did you have a good night? And they'd be like, that was fantastic. But nobody does that.
Yes.
And it's a very simple thing that anyone could do.
The irony in all of this is, so Mary has a group of friends, they're affectionately referred to as the Sues, as in the runaround Sues. And where do some of the Sues work?
So for background, I now still live with one of them, but one is my college roommate who's been my best friend for years. And until recently, I lived in an apartment with her twin sister, and our friend Sharon. It was like Sex and the City if they all lived in one apartment. My
more
friend,
cats.
more cats. Well, we're solo, Pete. I mean, we have to have some cats. They're not solo anymore. So my friend Rose works for Apple TV. And then my friend Sharon just started working at Netflix.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
This is my roommate, who's going to the H Mart fish counter with me.
Yes.
She works at Netflix. And then the other one, Leone, is actually an artist.
That's okay.
She's the only one besides me that's not in.
So it's a 50-50 split.
It's a 50-50 split.
Yeah, that's right. So what's interesting is, I don't even consider myself a writer the way you consider yourself a writer, although I write, and I'm compelled to write now. For me, that happened much later in life. I would say that I started to feel like a writer when I was turning 40. But it's had a profound effect on me. We'll get into my story a little bit more. Before we dive a bit more into this, is there something in particular you're writing right now that you're finding compelling?
Sure. So this is the thing. I feel like it's tough to say, when you're writing, say, a short story, which is really what I'm mostly doing.
By the way, what is the difference between a short story and an essay?
This is important for you to know. Well, so it's just an essay is a very broad category, but it's just anything it's nonfiction. Okay. It could be a personal essay. It's a story that actually happened to you, or it can be sort of more contemplative meditations on things going on in the world, but it has to be a true story.
Okay.
And then a short story is just short fiction.
I see. Okay.
I wrote a story about
salacious.
I wrote kind of a salacious. It's sort of conceptual and philosophical. It was about a woman who wanted to be a priest, and since she couldn't be a priest, she became a sex worker, like a escort / sugar baby instead. And it's like comparing that to being a priest. And then Pete called it an essay, which would mean that I did that. So I said, Pete, I would never be a priest.
Yeah. So I've learned something. So I'm going to use a kind of framework that I present in Shtick to Business. So I have this business book, this fun business book. Actually, Mary knows the book because she was kind enough to help me with some edits at one point. So she may not actually have learned anything from reading it, but she actually read all the words. So she helped a lot with tense. There were a lot of tense errors in the book. So thank you for that. But the book has a whole chapter on writing. It's called Write It or Regret It. And I've been told that it's one of the few business books that actually addresses writing. And I think that you don't have to be a business person to appreciate this. So I'm going to put forth the framework that I use in that book to talk about this. So, So the first thing I say is that we should think about writing as a way to record our ideas. That to start a writing practice, one of the best ways to begin it and one of the best reasons to have it is just to capture what's happening in the world.
Yeah. So we call this... with my teaching program at USC, they emphasized that it's important to have both formal writing and informal writing.
Okay.
So there's a lot of people who only write when they have to write something for school or for work.
Yes.
And then informal writing is more to work out your own ideas. It's like thinking on paper.
Yes.
And they're both equally important. But talking about ratios, probably most people don't have a 50-50 ratio on those.
Yes, I don't think so. But I think this idea of informal writing or just writing to record has multiple benefits. So one of those things is just like, so this is perfect because I got a list. I asked some listener questions, and I got a question from Julie, who actually has been part of the show before, and she wrote, "I'm not a writer, and I don't enjoy writing. The most creative writing I do is in my journal, and I usually just blabber away about something that is bothering me. Do you have any hints how to make journal writing more of a creative process rather than just for venting?"
Sure. Is this a question for me?
It's for us.
Okay.
But I want you to go.
So I love a prompt. I tend to not use them because I just always have things I want to write about anyway, but the writing group I'm in, my teacher gives us a prompt every week.
I see.
So then, there's been these studies that people are more creative under more constraints rather than fewer, because I don't know exactly why, but it just works.
Some of it's persistence.
Yeah. To give yourself a constraint and even just a specific topic, you're only going to write about that and then kind of see where it leads. Or if you're really trying to just do like creative writing, like pick something, describe it, see how long you can spend describing it.
I'll add something to this. So first of all, I don't think there's anything wrong with just free journaling.
No.
Just what comes to mind and so on. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem. In part because you just don't know what you're going to come up with, that you might want to do something more creative with it at some other point. I'll offer a particular, so first of all, there are a variety of, like, you can buy journals on the market that are designed to help guide your thinking process. So a previous guest and co-host, Isabella Amani, is working on a workbook right now that's designed to do that. I suspect it'll be out soon. But the very basic one, and one that actually has some science behind it, is gratitude journaling. And so there's really fascinating research. I think that kind of, especially during these kind of tumultuous times, it's really valuable to be journaling, because I think you'll want to look back on it. I find I've started journaling rather recently. I recently lost a journal, and it's just destroying me at this point, which is sort of ironic because I went almost my whole life with never journaling. And
I don't journal.
Yeah.
I don't journal at all.
But you do plenty of other writing.
Yeah.
I do some journaling, and one of the things that I think is fascinating is I'll often go back and read what I was anxious about, and I go, oh, I don't even remember that thing. It's been a good way to learn that oftentimes the things that seem so important in the moment aren't really that important in the long run.
Perspective.
But the gratitude journaling is really fascinating. So it's very simple. You don't need to buy a specific journal to do this. Any journal will be fine. What you do is, at the end of the day, you write down 3 things that went well and why. And what's fascinating is that the why part is a very important part of that. And so what's basically been found is that regular gratitude journaling has a positive effect on people, on their moods, their emotions, the way they see the world, and so on. And some of it makes a lot of sense, right? So our tendency is to think about, as Julie was saying, things that are bothering her. And I get that, because, people believe that venting is a good way to help cope, and it is better than suppressing. But writing about positive things gets to move your perspective to those positive things. It's a reflective exercise. So even in a bad day, you can come up with 3 things that went well, even if it's just, they're little things, little acts of kindness. But the why is important, because you can now give yourself a chance to learn, when I do that, good things happen. And the whys end up mattering. Right.
And if you don't know why, then you won't be able to replicate it, and then you'll have a negative day.
Indeed.
No, I'm kidding. One thing I wanted to talk about too is social media.
Okay.
In relation to this, because I read an article a while back written by, I wish I could remember who wrote it. It was like a literary fiction writer, and he was talking about this tendency that if you have an Instagram, you have Twitter, you have an interesting idea, whether you're like a comedian or a literary writer, anyone, you have an idea, people are going to like it. You post it right away, tweet it right away. And the problem with that, he was talking about how posting is sort of the illusion of creating.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you are creating in a sense, but what happens is you have this instant, like, as soon as I post something on Instagram, then the likes come in and I feel this gratification and people tell me, oh, this is cool. And then I forget about it because I already got that gratification. Versus if I were to record it, where I record all of my ideas for things, and then later maybe you're coming back to it. If you come back to it from a future time, you can actually see what real merit it has.
Yes,
if you look at it days or weeks later. And then if you actually make something out of it, that gratification is going to be so much better and so much more real than the likes, the retweets.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
So Shane Moss a comedian friend of mine, he's talked about this, is he has pulled back a lot on social media, especially when it comes to joke telling.
Yeah.
And his
save it for the stage.
Yeah, his hypothesis is that most of the jokes that he would tell on Twitter, for example, aren't fully fleshed out.
Right.
But because he puts them out in the world, he feels like it allows him to sort of release them. Mm-hmm. And that if he wrote them in his notebook, his mind would continue to work on them, and he would continue to improve them until they were ready for a higher stakes environment, which is still low stakes, which is just trying it on stage. But on stage feels much higher than on social media.
Yeah, I mean, this is the skill that's underdeveloped right now, I believe, is sitting in solitude with your thoughts.
Yes.
Working out something without telling anyone. I mean, there are plenty of people that, an idea before it's anything, they'll just throw it out there and vet it. Like, hey, what about this idea? And, not that there's nothing wrong with doing that sometimes, but we live in this world where you're never sitting with anything for that long. And I think that that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think, let's turn, we're going to come back to that a little bit, because when it comes to sort of trying to develop a bit more of a writing/creative process, right? So if I'm going to encourage people who want to live a remarkable life to make creative things, we should probably help them in terms of tactics to approach those things. So I think one of the things, just this continuing responding to Julie's thing about her journal, is this idea that moving from just simply recording ideas to what I would call clarifying ideas. And that is that I think that writing has this very special place for developing ideas. Mm-hmm. All right. So it's not just I'm writing down how I feel, but the act of writing requires enough precision that it forces me to formulate those ideas in a more precise kind of way, especially if I want to start to make something of this.
Joan Didion said, I write to know what I think. In other words, she has all these essays that you read it and you're like, she's a genius. But when she started writing it was an exploration. She just had something strange happened, like the entire 1960s. And and she just starts writing, and then at the end of it, you have Slouching Toward Bethlehem. But each essay, you just write and rewrite and rewrite.
Yes, I have this quote in my book about, it's like if you want to learn something, read a book about it. You know, if you want to learn more, or if you want to really understand it, read 10 books about it. Yeah. But if you want to become an expert, write about it.
Did I tell you I used that quote for my final presentation for my technology in the classroom class at USC?
No.
Totally worked. I hated that class.
Wait, you used that exact quote about...
Yeah, I started out my presentation.
Did you cite me?
No.
That's plagiarism.
Well,
all right, that's fine. But so tell me how you used it.
It's really not very interesting. It's
okay.
But I just used it. It was about using digital publishing platforms to publish student work, so that they're seeing their writing in a magazine instead of just handing it into the teacher. It's the idea of having it be a communal group activity versus just giving it to the teacher.
Oh, neat. That's great.
Which is another thing we should talk about, is that to me, writing is not a solitary pursuit.
You're one step ahead.
I'm one step ahead.
So this idea of writing to clarify, I'm a big believer in what I call the one pager, right? So the value of writing to develop idea. Tell me again that quote, which is, I write to know my thoughts.
Write to know what I think.
I write to know what I think. I like that a lot, because it's easy to be sloppy with writing, but if you want it to be good, you need to be precise.
Yeah.
And so
I feel like we're kind of skipping, though, like we're getting right to the how do you write something in a precise way, but we kind of skipped the why write anyway.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
I kind of wanted to share this Tom Wolfe quote.
Please.
That I find very interesting. So if you don't know, Tom Wolfe was part of the new journalism movement. Shut up, Pete. Shut up. Let me have this.
No one knows who Tom Wolfe is.
He's very famous. A lot of people know who he is. He wrote Bonfire of the Vanities.
Okay.
That's his big novel. You've probably heard of that.
Yeah, I've seen that movie.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Leave. So he was a journalist he was just a hugely influential journalist throughout the 20th century. He wrote a lot of great things. So this is the quote, and this is sort of what I always wanted to be, what I hope to be, to a lesser extent than Tom Wolfe. I found early in the game that for me, there's no use trying to blend in. I might as well be the village information gatherer, the man from Mars who simply wants to know. Fortunately, the world is full of people with information compulsion who want to tell you their stories. They want to tell you things that you don't know. They're some of the greatest allies that any writer has. So, I mean, I love that idea of being the man from Mars, right? There's also this other David Foster Wallace speech where he says the joke, one goldfish says to another goldfish, "Oh, the water's cold today." Mm-hmm. And then the other goldfish goes, "What's water?"
Yeah, exactly.
It's like being so present that you're able to notice everything. But I think it's very similar to a comedian. A poet and a comedian are two sides of the same coin to me, of noticing.
Yeah, Jerry Seinfeld says that comedians are humanoids.
Yeah.
They're not aliens. They're not humans. They sit in this space between where they know enough, but they're not completely immersed that they can't pick up the weird things in the world.
Well, Tom Wolfe took it a step further. So writers are actually from Mars.
I see.
Yeah.
But I like that idea that people telling you the stories are your allies, right? That's where you're going to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
But okay, how does this relate to this idea of why you should write?
because to me, it's not just an act. It's a way of living. It's a way of being in the world. Like I'm never not writing because I have the notes section of my phone. I just have like a writing folder, and then just everything that happens, I'm like writing. Something I see, I'll have a sentence that I can describe it with. I'll have an idea. So it's just everything. It can get too weird because it can almost feel like I don't care enough about what actually happens to me. I just care about if I can write something from it.
Well, I mean, I think that's the sort of farther end, right? You know, like when you're living in this world of mastery, you become compelled to do this thing. Yeah. You know.
And I tend toward extremes. So do you.
Okay, that's fair. I don't think, but what I want to say is that you don't have to reach sort of Mary Dom levels of writing for it to be useful.
No. I mean, that's what I'm saying is that I just want to talk about the use before we talk about, how to write more, and to me, the use is being present in the world and noticing things.
I see.
And thinking about things and exploring things.
Yes.
So.
We're on the same page here.
Yeah.
So to me, that's why I like, as I was saying, like the sort of one pager idea is you have an idea. Like many of us are walking around with ideas. We have business ideas. We have
right.
things that we want to do in life. And what I often say is before you put that enormous time and effort, the resources into doing those things, I encourage people to write about doing those things.
Yeah.
And I like the one pager, aka the one sheet, because it serves as a constraint. It's like, all right, you just have to write this one page about this thing. So I wrote a one pager for Solo before I launched it. And by the end of the time that I wrote that, I sort of knew what this project was going to be like, at least what it was going to start like. And I could no longer be sort of loose with the ideas because but then what ended up happening.
And you have one page. You have to decide what fits on the page, what doesn't fit.
What's important, what's not important, and so on. And why it's a compelling project and who is it for and what is it going to look like and what is it going to feel like. And what I think is sort of fascinating is a lot of people, when they think about writing, they think about communicating, right? They think about writing an essay or a short story or a poem or a memo or an email or whatnot. But I think like so far, almost all of the writing that we've discussed is writing that's just for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens, though, at some point, it becomes important, or you become compelled that you need to write for others, that you need to share these ideas with others in written form. So in the case of the one-pager, I showed it to a lot of people, and I got their feedback from it. What did they like? What did they didn't like? What were their questions about it?
You showed me the one-pager for Shtick to Business to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did. I wrote a one-pager for that book. I wrote a one-pager with my co-author for the Humor Code. I write a one-pager for any big project that I think about doing. And then I often, at the end of writing the one-pager, I decide not to do it.
Yeah.
And so, and there's even language in that one-pager for solo. I'll put it in the exhibits that I use. It shows up in the intro to the podcast. It shows up in the language that I use.
Unapologetically unattached. Was that in there?
It might be. I wouldn't be surprised. I know that idea of being single for now or forever is in there.
Yeah.
And so the language that I use in these conversations show up in that thing because it serves as this kind of sort of keystone for, is that the right way to say it? Keystone for this project. And so, So that idea of, when you hear this idea of writing to communicate, I mean, you're doing a lot of that right now because you're targeting these journals, these publishers. You want to move from being a writer to a published author.
Right. But I don't know. I think of communicate more. Maybe that's just, I think of communicate as like corporate communications.
Okay. I just think of communicate as there's a writer and there's an audience. There's someone who's,
right.
who's writing and someone who's reading.
You mean it's not for myself. You're saying it's for other people.
When I say communicate, I mean to write for others.
Yes.
Yes. So what compels you to write for others versus writing for yourself?
Because it's not, I don't want to conflate like journaling with writing. Journaling is very useful, and journaling is useful for a number of reasons, and journaling is intended for no audience. And then I think literary writing, I don't know why you would write it not for an audience. Well, and I have to have an audience to be able to write it. So I'm in this writing group that I found through an organization called Writers Workshops of Los Angeles. The structure is just that it's working writers. A lot of them are also professors at MFA programs. A lot of them were like famous names I knew that I couldn't believe I could just take a class with and sit every week in their
That's how little money writing can get you.
Nothing. That's why I have to get married against my will. So like I couldn't believe that I could just go to these people's living rooms and be in a writer's workshop with them in a group of like 8 people once a week. Of course, they're famous to me. I'm sure they're not famous to most people in the world. But I have this group.
They're called micro celebrities.
They're called micro celebrities. So, I have this group of people that read it, and this very accomplished writer, I'll throw her name out there, Lisa Fetchko. She's awesome. That she reads it, and then she reads 2, 3, 4 drafts until it's done. And that's why I say writing is not a solitary act. I mean, the writing is, but then you have to show it to someone to finish it.
I love that.
You can't.
Yeah, I love that because so one of my least popular episodes is the boxing episode. And
because it wasn't about deadlifting.
I really enjoyed doing that episode in part because I've been boxing, and I enjoy boxing. But I actually came to the same conclusion about boxing, is that at first blush, boxing seems like a solo sport. Mm-hmm. But when you start to unpack what you need to box and to become a better boxer, is you need others, right? You need an opponent. You need a trainer. You need a coach. You need a sparring partner. And so all of those things help move you from shadow boxing, which might be journaling, to boxing.
Yeah.
And so I like that idea that when you write to communicate, you're moving away from a purely solo endeavor even if the moments that you spend in front of your keyboard are solitary moments.
Yeah, and I think that, and then you build so much community when, you know, you have a common goal. Your goals might be slightly different. Like someone might be, you know, someone might be trying to publish a novel and somebody else is more just kind of writing for fun, but you have a common goal of mastery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when mastery is a common goal, everything is a lot, like friendships are deeper. There's sort of this deeper level than just like we're hanging out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There's a difference between sitting and watching a movie together and sitting and critiquing each other's essays or short stories.
Right. And that doesn't sound fun, but it is fun. There's wine, we laugh. It's a good time.
Yeah, of course. I want to push back on one idea that you have about this idea. You don't want to conflate journaling with writing to communicate. To me, I just see, you know, they're both to me an act of writing, of putting ideas down on paper, putting down sentences on paper. It's just the goals might be a little bit different. That they both can serve you. I don't think that one is necessarily better than the other.
No, I'm not saying that one is better, and I'm not saying that they both can't serve you. But I'm saying the fact that the goals are different means that the writing is completely different.
That's fair.
It's kind of like, you know, it's kind of the same as formal versus informal writing.
That's fair. Although I would say this is that oftentimes formal writing is derived from informal writing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But the reverse doesn't happen.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have? So now we're kind of getting into the sort of more serious side of this, right? Because it feels like the stakes go up when you have an audience. And I think that's part of the reason why people don't like to write, because now there's skin in the game. Mm-hmm. You know, now you actually have to face whether people like or don't like, you know, I mean, I've looked at my reviews of the humor code. You know, I've written academic papers and I've read the peer reviews of those. And so, you know, you're putting ideas out in the world and people may like them, may hate them. Some people may like them. Some people may hate them. They may bore people. They may excite people and so on. But, what, if you are looking at this sort of more formal writing, as you would say, or as I'm saying, writing to communicate, what advice do you have for people, whether they be on the novice side or on the more expert side, that you find is useful?
First of all, I think I find it hilarious, the idea that I'm giving advice, because I know things, but I'm not, you know, I'm not Lisa. I'm not my writing teacher.
That's fine, but you can also.
But I would say my number one piece of advice is find a group, find someone to give you not just feedback, the right kind of feedback. Because that was why I really fell away from the thing that I always was the only thing I wanted to do. I fell away from it for such a long time because I moved to Los Angeles. I'm looking around. Everyone works for TV and film. And that's what all my friends were doing. And I just felt like it was just me doing this. And my writing I wasn't writing very much. So of course it wasn't getting better, but it couldn't have gotten better without anyone to read it.
Look, one of the great secrets of many great writers is there's often a great editor.
Yeah, that's the argument with. So
is it Tom Wolfe who has these like stories of delivering like 1,000, like delivering a book in the back of a van, and then the editor? Who was that? Oh,
I don't know.
I've heard these crazy stories about like someone had just like reams of writing and then this editor very carefully going through it. And
I don't know, probably every editor would say, yeah, that's me.
I think you're right.
But I mean, I don't know about Tom Wolfe, but I had this debate when you're doing your student teaching, you have like a mentor teacher. I had a really fantastic mentor teacher, and I love F. Scott Fitzgerald and she hates him. So we were always like butting heads about that. And her argument, because The Great Gatsby is like, people don't get it because they're like, Jesus, why the hell does every high school kid have to read this goddamn book? And it's because it's because it's aside from what it's about the American dream. So that it's a technically perfect novel.
What does that mean?
It's perfect. It's
just the pacing of it, the motifs, and the way that images are introduced in the beginning and then come back later, that it's so tightly composed that everything in it has meaning. Like, people say that English teachers overanalyze things.
Okay.
And they're like, why does everything have to mean something else? But in that book, like, it really does.
I see.
Down to, like, every word is very intentional. So that's, and then it's just his rhythm. Like, writing is like music. That's what, like, people will ask, like, what's something about blah, 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 but, I read also for the sound and just the way the sentences flow. So that book is perfect. And that's why you read it in high school. But the reason I brought it up is that my mentor teacher was saying that it's only good because of the editor. She's like, it's not good because of F. Scott. He was a drunk. She's like, F. Scott turned in like reams of paper, and then the editor was like, oh, there's some good shit in here.
That's amazing.
It's sort of like giving a sculptor like a perfect piece of marble, but then they actually made the thing. I disagree, but I'm biased.
It's a debate
because I love him.
But I think that you both would agree that the editor matters.
Yeah, the editor matters
in the same way that a
amount.
producer matters when it comes to music. You know, I think that that you can see this oftentimes. I really am kind of moved by this idea how connected this is to sort of an overarching theme about, if you want to live a solo life, a remarkable life, you ironically need others. You just don't need a partner.
Yeah.
And so if you want to write The Great Gatsby, you need others.
Good luck.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, whatever that might be, you know, you need, look, stick to business. The list of people, I mean, my list of acknowledgments.
Oh, I read your acknowledgments.
Is long.
Am I still in there?
You are in there, yes. It's a long list of acknowledgments because you don't write something substantial, something you're proud of alone. At least you don't get it published alone, you know, and so there's a lot of people who come and help with that. So let's talk a little bit about a little bit more for kind of someone who wants to create a bit of a writing practice.
Okay.
So I have some questions from Kim, who's a writer, that I think might relate. Actually, it relates a little bit more before we get into the practice to this sort of more general feeling about how writing is hard. Writing is hard. Mm-hmm. And then that'll tee up for me. Let me give you an example, I think, for how hard writing is. So I was like Julie. I was like most people. I was a bad writer. I rarely wrote. I only wrote when I had to, and it was just agonizing when I did it. And, you know, the average person can get through life with that. But as an academic, where the currency
publish or perish
are peer-reviewed papers, that's a really dicey situation to be in. And I found myself approaching tenure and really struggling because I wasn't producing enough, and the quality of the work wasn't good enough, in my opinion.
It's weird to think of you struggling.
I was. And so the good thing about me is that I'm such a problem solver, and I'm really reflective, that when I was going through my mid-tenure review, I did my own personal and professional reflection. And I did an assessment of my life, just soup to nuts. And and basically 3 things showed up for me. One was I had a bad back. I actually talked about that in a previous episode.
Wait, like your actual back?
My low back. I had a bad back. I had a lot of pain and
was it from trying to be a lacrosse pro in your middle age?
No, it goes all the way back to being a teenager. And I talk about that in the pain, injury, and moving with joy episode with Charlie Merrill. The second one is I had a really problematic relationship with my mom. It was so profoundly bad. It was I was her primary caregiver from far away, and it was making me deeply unhappy. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing was that my writing sucked. I was terrible at writing. And so what I did was I just did a bunch of reading about writing. I just studied it. Like, you know, that's the beautiful thing about the world. If there's a problem, there's someone who's written about it. I just happen to have a problem with writing. And that's the great thing is writers like to write about writing. And so there are plenty of resources. One of the things that I found, I think I found it on the internet somewhere, was someone had done an analysis of great writers and looked at their commonalities. And one of the commonalities was that they write every day. They tend to write first thing in the morning, and then they tend to drink coffee when they write. And so I just was like, okay, that's what I'll do. If the great writers do it, then I must need to write it. I wasn't at that age. I wasn't even drinking coffee. I had gone my first 40 years of my life without drinking coffee. And I was like, okay, I'll start drinking coffee. And so now I enjoy my delicious cappuccino when I sit down to write in the morning. But it was agonizing. And I started timing myself. I was tracking at that time how much writing I was doing. And I remember doing like 45 minutes of writing, and it was just hell on earth. Now, what was amazing was because I was committed to doing it every day, I came back the next day. I came back the next day. I came back the next day. And it didn't take weeks or months, but it took over a year, certainly, and maybe as many as 3 years. I eventually came to enjoy writing, so much so that I am compelled to do it.
Yeah, I mean, by the time I met you, you're like, what are we doing? We're going to a coffee shop and don't talk to me for 3 hours.
Well,
I can't wait to get to know you. No, I mean, I think that's what I like to do too. I'm the same way. I like to write every day. I try to write at the same time every day. I can't always make that happen, but that's the ideal for me. And I do time myself, and I record in like a calendar. I put an X over every day that I wrote, and I write how many hours I wrote and what I worked on.
yeah, this is that what gets measured.
Right, but I don't measure.
maximized.
Some people measure word count, and I don't do that because you can do really solid work and end the day with the same word count as the day before, because you're doing structural changes and syntax. So,
well, also here's the other
hours.
problem: is that oftentimes writing benefits from subtracting, from cutting.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so word count is only good when you're creating a shitty
when you're
first
trying
draft.
to exactly.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that I don't want to give the impression that, I mean, it is true when you look at writers, a lot of them, like writers throughout history, a lot of them tend to fall into this routine. They write in the morning, they write at the same time every day, they write every day. But really, I mean, the way to do it is what works for you.
That's fair.
So my writing teacher, Lisa, I have like more respect for her than any writer I know personally. I don't know that many.
That's fine.
But she's great. She writes, she does kind of the long days and then off days. Like she'll write,
I see.
like she'll write 4 hours for a couple days, and then she'll have a day where she takes a break. So it's kind of it's like a work really hard and then let her mind just clear. So then she comes back to it and she has a different perspective. I wouldn't do that because I don't have enough discipline. I need the just like every day.
Short bursts. Yeah. And again, this is just to be clear, this is for the more serious person. Like if you're thinking of starting a writing practice, it's going to be hard to do that. You just have to recognize it and just know that just like the first day of going for a run is going to be bad. But if you go for a run 4 days a week at the end of a year, you wake up in the morning and it would feel weird not to run.
Yeah, unless you're me. And it always.
I think that even if you dedicated yourself to running, it would be
after I run, it's like the parts that are supposed to be sore, like my legs are fine, and it'll be like the side of my neck hurts. Like I realize I run, like I hold my neck a weird way. Like I don't know how to hold my body, I realized.
That's fair. Okay, fine. Maybe you're an exception. So, let's talk about this. So this is connected to what I call work hard or hardly work. So how do you create a practice that's designed to create creative products, right? So writing aside for a moment, what we're talking about applies regardless of writing. It could be sculpting, it could be painting, it could be any number of activities, which is to set aside time to do it, make that time sacred, what I call protect. The next one is to grind, that is to on a regular basis to perform that activity, not waiting for inspiration. You know, it's like this time arrives and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. I have a quote here about this.
Please.
E.B. White.
A writer who waits for ideal conditions under which to work will die without putting a word to paper.
Yeah, it's just that rarely are we inspired. But when we have those, and I think Steve Pressfield, who wrote the book The War of Art, which I like a lot, says you don't wait for the muse to visit you. You sit and start writing. No, I think what it is, you don't wait for the muse. You start writing and the muse visits you. Something along those lines.
Or even if you are inspired and you think you don't have time.
Yes.
You have to make the time somehow.
But the other idea that I think that you just mentioned that I think is really important is this idea of releasing yourself. So you do the work and then you step away from it and you take a break and you do something enjoyable. You do something social. You let life go on.
But the truth is that that's just not possible for everyone. So, I'm fun employed right now because I just graduated from my master's program and I'm looking for a full-time teaching job. And so I have lots of time. But when I was teaching all day, I would try to write in the morning before work, which meant I was waking up at like 4:30 or 5. And then, my ideal now is I like to write and then I'm done and then I might go work out. I go do something else or go back into my home where I'm quarantined.
Right.
But, if you're working, you might write and then you just have to go to the office.
That's
and you're
fair.
Like, shit. So.
But ideally you have some release in your day.
You have some release
whether it be
some
exercise,
points in the day.
a walk, a meal with a friend, those kinds of things.
For me, the writing itself is the release.
Okay.
I know that this is not true for everyone, but I really enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I enjoy it.
That's fascinating.
More than anything else, even when it's hard. But yes, I like that was actually my favorite part of your book. I don't know if I told you this. The protect, grind, release part.
Yes.
Do you want to kind of explain the general?
Yeah. So the general idea behind that is, and so I like this idea of trying to create habits. So Scott Adams says, have systems, don't have goals. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of people think that you're going to be successful in life by having goals, but really what happens is you just want these sort of, what I call, these sort of automatic behaviors. When X happens, I'm going to do Y. Right. So when I get up in the morning, I'm going to go for a run. These are things that take decision making out of it. Mm-hmm. And so, how is it that you can develop those things? Well, you have to kind of create a context that makes it best for that. So for example, if you have creative work to do, you want to set aside time every day or often to work on that, where you're not going to schedule a dentist appointment, where you're not going to check email. You're going to take that time to be sacred. That's the protect. The grind is the regular basis in which you do it, and the regular basis is necessary. One is because anything worth doing is going to be difficult. It's going to take time. And the other one is that it takes time to develop mastery. And so if you just work on something one day a week, now you've got to wait 150 weeks to start to get mastery on it. But if you work on it every day, now you only have to wait 150 days to get mastery on it. And then the last one is that we're not machines. We're not meant to run 24/7, and that we need to take care, to go back to the thing, is your health number one. And so, sitting for hours on end, even if it's compelling endeavor, is not good for our body. And so, and being completely isolated for hours on day isn't always good for our soul, even if it's compelling to do that. And so complementing it with some release, to get some sunlight, to get some fresh air, to spend time with friends, and also what happens is that stepping away from it, like your teacher says, it allows a chance for your unconscious mind to work on it, to reflect on these things.
But what I like about it is the intentionality. So I think we live in a multitasking culture is one thing. And, instant gratification is a big motivator. I think I have more of a problem with instant gratification than you have, because you've developed it.
That's exactly right.
I know you've worked on it more than I have, but so we have a tendency. So when I was, in grad school, it was really hard and my life was quite awful. I would have been, the ideal way to cope with that would have been to have, a protected time
where I write, the grind. I work only on all the stuff I have to do for my grad program and my teaching. And then I have a time where I release and I don't think about that. And I completely do things for my health and social. But then what happens is when you have all that to do, you try to combine them. So I would be like socializing with friends, you know, like in the classroom at USC while we're kind of half working on our stuff. And then it ends up being like, you don't feel a satisfaction from hanging out with them fully. You don't feel you've accomplished the work fully.
Yes. One of the things that I have been complimented a couple times recently, which I take as a very high compliment, which is, Pete, you're present.
You are.
That is, when I'm with you, I'm there. I'm 100%.
It's kind of scary. It's like nothing gets by you.
But when I'm not present, good luck. You know what I mean? You may not get a hold of me.
Yeah.
And so I would rather be 0 or 100 rather than 40%.
Well, and it's more productive. So I've read that technically the brain cannot multitask. When you feel like you're multitasking, it's really just that your brain is quickly jumping from one thing to the other. So if you're like reading something while you're watching TV, it's just jumping back and forth between the TV and what you're reading. So what it really is just inefficiency.
Yeah.
It's just wasted time.
I mean, I will say this. I do struggle concentrating just like everyone else. I just struggle a little less, you know. I mean, part of the reason I love doing these podcasts is because it forces me to be so present.
It does.
Yes.
But I think about this a lot, especially teaching high schoolers, because to be honest, I started teaching because I love English literature and I love writing. And what's come to happen is that it's made me think so much more about like how we're evolving in society, like where the future is going to be in terms of how people behave. Their inability to focus on one thing for a sustained period of time. And it's not like a deficit view of them. It's just what they grew up with on phones and stuff.
The world's more distracting than
ever. People are, especially the next generation, I think it's going to be, I hope that the trend of mindfulness continues to get bigger and then it starts being an intentional thing that people work on to be 0 or 100 and not constantly multitasking. Cause I just think that it doesn't lead to satisfaction. So that's why I like your model of the.
No, thank you. It's not easy to do, but it becomes easier as you do it. I want to do, before we wrap up, I want to get back to Kim's questions because I had teed them up and then didn't ask them. So I think one we might have already answered in some way. So she writes, a question specific to right now at this time when we all feel so isolated because of the social distancing and quarantine. Why commit yourself to a task that is even more isolating?
So my first thought is, I don't think this is hopefully not a task you would start during the quarantine and then just give up. Like it would be a practice that you would want to continue.
It's a good time to start a new set of habits.
So it's like, why not start it now?
When it's easier.
When you have time. I mean, you have to have something to do. And then the other thing is we are like physically distant, but I've been video conferencing with friends. I've been talking a lot on the phone to people or on social media. So why not write something? And if you wanted to, send it to someone. And then maybe like that's something interesting. Like, oh, I never have read anything that this person sent me. And now you add something new and interesting to their day. Maybe it could be a good way to like shake up the boredom of the quarantine. Yeah,
I like that idea. I like this idea that, okay, well, you have to be a little bit isolated, so you might as well make the best use of being isolated. And then the nature of writing is best either when solitary or parallel solitary. And then I like the idea that just because you're socially distant doesn't mean you have to be emotionally disconnected.
Right.
And so I like that idea of sharing. So this actually related to our other questions, which is, how do you continue moving forward with the project when you just want to give up because you feel like it's not good enough or is not translating to the page the way you had seen it in your head, or you just suck?
oh, this one's very relatable to me. So this is the big thing about, I don't think it's just writing. I think it's anything creative. The vision of it that you have in your head will always be better than the final product. Always. So in a way, it's an exercise in disappointment, but it's still better to have a product rather than to have an idea in your head, which is really nothing.
Yes.
And to go back to Joan Didion, and I keep using her, but she's a master, and she was the one who, I don't have like a quote, but she expressed this idea. She said, the idea that I have before I write is always way better than, and you're like, what? Like, because her writing is incredible. So I think it's two things. It's one, there's like a level of acceptance you just have to have that it's not going to be what you thought it was going to be, because it never is. And then two is that sometimes you abandon a project.
Yeah, it's okay to quit.
It's okay to be like, you know what, this is not good. Quit.
Sure.
And you'll know when that needs to happen. And then three, I think some of the fun, I'm calling it fun, but I think it can become fun if you practice. There's something fun or satisfying is maybe a better word about improving.
Yeah,
something.
I think satisfying. That's why I use that term when I think about engagement. It's satisfying.
Yeah. So it's like it's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, I mean, in strict to business, I use the metaphor of a craftsperson, like a blacksmith.
Right.
Right. So you look at what a blacksmith is doing, and they're just sitting there and they're just banging away on this piece of metal over and over again. And when they're done and they have a sword in their hand, you can see why they would be satisfied. Right? You can understand, oh, I've created something special, something useful. But what people don't understand is that for the master blacksmith, every swing of the hammer can have a moment of satisfaction because every swing matters. It's doing something. It's shaping, and that's what we all aspire to, but is difficult to get to. Kim had also wrote when to share with your first group of readers, and I think she actually answers her question that I just said, which is you feel like you're kind of stuck. You don't think it's very good. Maybe you share it with someone who can give you good feedback, right? That someone who might give you either the kind of encouragement that you need. Oh, no. I see that. I love your premise. Oh, I like what you're doing. Oh, this sentence is fantastic. Or maybe they say, it's not quite right. And they might even be able to give you some feedback, or at least help you decide whether you should continue or not.
Yeah, or just to get a completely different perspective. Like my writing group, everyone has such different styles. Like my style is completely different from just everyone's style is completely different from everybody else in there. But we're still able to give each other all this feedback. And the thing that's interesting is that seeing other people's styles, and I know like, oh, I'm not going to write like that. Yeah. But then seeing how such a drastically different way to do it kind of expands the way that you're thinking about it. You might be tempted to try something that you wouldn't normally do.
Yes.
Or like try something radically different.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, Kim, keep writing. We're excited for you. All right. We're going to, I think, wrap up here. We're going to come back in a few moments and do our little bonus material. Mary shares some of her favorite stories about the magnificent lengths that writers will go to hone their craft.
I think magnificent length is a little dramatic.
I'm over-promising. Okay. Mary, thanks so much. This was great.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, we're back for a little bonus material. So Mary Dahm is still here, and she's going to share some stories about the magnificent lengths that writers will go to hone their craft. So what do you got for me? I have no idea what these are, so surprise me.
All right. So I just love writing lore, any kind of lore, really. This just a few kind of things that writers did, strategies, weird habits. So Vladimir Nabokov, that's the author of one of the most controversial novels of all time, Lolita. He actually did not compose things on paper or on typewriter. He wrote his novels on index cards that he kept in these little boxes. So that way, he was so much freer with the structure that if he wanted to reorder scenes, he would just reorder the cards. And then he also kept some cards under his pillow. So if he had an idea in the middle of the night, he would write it down.
That's cool.
I think that's important to like write everything down.
Is Lolita a linear story?
It is a linear story, but it's still, even a linear story, like the scenes could still be in very different orders. So it just kind of frees you up.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know there's like a little bit of, this happens in filmmaking sometimes, where people have scenes and they map out the scenes and storyboard and all those kinds of things. So it almost makes the writing almost a more visual kind of task.
Yeah, just anything like making it physical or putting note cards on like a cork board, moving them around, stuff like that.
Yeah, so speaking of this, with when I was working on the one-pager for Solo, so Kim, who had asked some questions earlier, one of the things that she had me do was to cut this piece of paper, cut the actual paper up and so into the sentences, and then work at seeing about actually rearranging them on a table.
Yeah, Lisa, my writing teacher, does that too.
Yeah.
She prints it out and then she cuts it up.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Okay, what's number 2?
So that's one. Number 2 is maybe my favorite because I'm obsessed with both of these writers. The Great Gatsby was not always the classic it is today. So Hunter S. Thompson was just recognized early that The Great Gatsby was a perfect novel and that F. Scott Fitzgerald was a genius. And he just wanted to get, like, I think the way he worded it was like absorb the rhythm of the sentences.
Mm-hmm.
So he typed up all of The Great Gatsby on a typewriter.
Wait, he took the book.
He took the book.
And he put open page 1,
right.
And he just started typing.
He just typed the entire thing. I mean, I'm sure he was on a lot of drugs while he did it. It's Hunter S. Thompson. He's probably on lewds and.
That's wild.
But yes.
So this reminds me of a story of.
And I think it worked because I think you can see in his sentences they do have a similar rhythm to F. Scott's.
That's fascinating.
Anyway.
I heard this story about Michael Jackson. This is not exactly the same, but I think it shows this sort of. Look, these are magnificent lamps. I have not overpromised. So, I heard the story that when the Bee Gees album with "Staying Alive" came out, that Michael Jackson
incredible music video.
that Michael Jackson listened to that album 100 times, or at least listened to that song 100 times.
I believe that.
And in order to try to figure it out. And I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand is that the masters of the craft, it's not that it comes easy to them. I mean, of course it does. It's easier to them than anyone else. But they're often so dedicated to the craft that they're willing to retype an entire book or listen to a song or an album 100 times.
I have seen the film School of Rock starring Jack Black.
That's different.
200 times. I have memorized it.
That's different.
It's not different.
What is the third one?
The third one is Jack Black's writing practice. No, the third one is Ben Franklin, actually, which he doesn't seem like the most like literary, but he has this autobiography called The Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. It's pretty on the nose.
Yes.
Which is almost just nauseating to read because he loves himself so much.
Well, he did really get a lot done in life.
I mean, yeah, he wasn't a loser, but he was obsessed with himself in a way that was narcissistic. But what you can learn from it is that he really believed, time is precious. Wasting time is wasting life. So he literally he had this journal that is historians still have, outlined every hour of his day.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would ask himself every morning, what good shall I do this day? Wrote it in the journal. And then every evening, what good have I done today?
Oh, it's a lot like the gratitude journal.
It is similar to that, except
Wow.
it's just very, very fastidious with how he spent his time. It was, extreme. It'd be like, I have 10 minutes to eat and then I have 20 minutes. But the idea, I think, is valuable.
Yes.
That treating time as something valuable.
Yes. As I like to say, ask people, do you have money problems or do you have time problems or do you have both?
I have both.
Yeah. So
Actually, no. Right now, it's just money.
You have money problems.
You're like, Mary, what are you talking about?
Yes.
You don't do anything.
But I mean, it's important to know whether you have one, the other, or both, or neither. I think you're most likely to have, no matter what, time problems, just because, we're not here forever.
Right.
And so if you're ambitious, if you have interest, if you're trying to live a remarkable life, that's the case. This was really great. I recognize that this, all the talk of writing might seem like inside baseball to some people. I commend you for sticking around to the very end. I hope that this has inspired you at the very least to consider this principle a little bit more. And when I say you, I mean you, the listener, to try to look for opportunities to create more than you can consume. And as always, really appreciate all the support that everybody's been given. Please rate, share, reach out to me. Let me know how we can make this better and how we can grow this podcast. I want more and more people to get involved. So thanks again, Mary.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.